200 people were laughing at him. A billionaire, a janitor, a dare designed to destroy. She placed her ring on the piano like a trophy she'd never have to surrender. Phones lifted. The room smelled blood. Everyone knew how this ended, the humiliation, the silence, the man walking back to his mop. He took off his gloves. The laughter stopped. His hands touched the keys, and something happened in that room that no one who was there would ever fully explain. Not their colleagues, not to their spouses, not to themselves at 3 a.m. when they replayed it. The woman who started it couldn't finish it. The music came first. That was always how it went, before the alarm, before the day assembled itself into its usual weight, but before thoughts start up again at the back of his head like an engine that never fully shut off. The music came first, 3:12 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. Dion Hayes sat in the dark at the Steinway upright in the music room of the Ashford Club and played Chopin. No lights, no sheet music, just his hands and the keys and the particular silence of a building that had gone to sleep around him. Hippie played the way you breathe when you've been holding your breath for a long time and finally remembered you don't have to. The piece was Ballade No. 1 in G minor. He had known it since he was 23. He knew it the way he knew his own name, not as information, but as something that lived in the body, in the fingers, in the place behind the sternum where music actually comes from. He played it through to the end. Then he sat for a moment in the silence after. Then he covered the keys, stood up, and pushed his cleaning cart back out into the corridor. Thursday morning was 2 days away, and Thursday was different from Tuesday. Tuesday was the music room. Thursday was the music room. Those were the nights Earl left the key on the cart hook and didn't say anything about it. And Dion used the room and put the key back before dawn, and acknowledged at what was happening, because acknowledgement would have made it into a thing. And a thing could be taken away. The rest of the week, Dion Hayes was a Lao Kong, a custodian, a man in a green uniform pushing a cart through corridors that smelled of cedar and old money and the specific absence of people like him. He pushed the cart back to the supply closet. He clocked out at 3:47 a.m. He took the train home to Brooklyn, and on Thursday morning, 2 days later, the alarm went off at 4:14 a.m., not 4:15, never 4:15. He had set it 1 minute early because somewhere in the architecture of how he survived, that 1 minute felt like the difference between keeping up and falling behind. 7 years of 4:14. The logic had long since stopped mattering. The habit remained. He lay still for exactly 3 seconds. Then he got up. The apartment was dark, not quiet. It was never quiet. The dialysis machine in the corner of the living room ran its low, constant hum, sound of a machine doing the work that at Ruzi's kidneys had mostly stopped doing 19 months ago. After a while, you stopped hearing it the way you stopped hearing traffic or rain. It became the background frequency of everything. 400 square feet in Beds, Brooklyn. 2 rooms if you were being generous. 1 if you were being honest. His mother's bed was 6 feet from where he slept. A fold-out sofa whose left hinge had started to stick, requiring a specific 2-handed upward yank each morning before it would click into position. He gave it the yank. It clicked. He moved through the kitchen in the dark. The overhead light had been out for 6 weeks. A replacement bulb cost $4.99 at the hardware store on Fulton Street. He walked past that store 3 times a week. He kept not stopping. There was a reason for that, probably. He had stopped examining the reason. Simone was asleep at the kitchen table, head on her forearm. Biochemistry textbook open underneath her face, the pages slightly crumpled where her cheek had pressed into them. The lamp beside her was still on, a small thing with a bent shade they had bought at a garage sale in 2019, the kind of lamp that cast light only to one side, leaving the other half of the table in dim. She was 22 years old. 2nd year at a college in the city, pre-med track with a music composition component she'd added over the summer against the advice of her academic advisor, and with the full support of exactly no one except herself. She looked younger when she slept. Dion pulled her cardigan up from the back of the chair and laid it over her shoulders without waking her. He stood there a second. With the water hadn't set in the kettle the night before, so the pipe's filling wouldn't travel through the thin walls and wake his mother at 4 a.m. Small things. You learned them. After enough time, they became automatic, the daily choreography of keeping a household going when the margins were as thin as these. He drank the coffee, standing at the counter, and did the math. He didn't have to. He knew the numbers. But the math happened anyway, the way some thoughts happen. Not because you invite them, but because they've been doing it long enough that they go on without you. Dialysis, 847s a week, rentum hall 200s a month, medication pays $340, 56 dollars.
Sabo 6 sauce.
The credit card, 75 on a month.
Todo says
Bond, 3 job 100 gap, 290 every month. For 4 months running, he was filling it with a credit card that now carried 10760 at 24, 9% interest. He knew the number exactly. He always knew the number exactly. That was the thing about surviving on margins. The numbers became part of you, as automatic as breathing, as unavoidable as the alarm at 4:14. He rinsed his cup, dried it, put it back on the shelf. He pulled on his work shirt, dark green, the Ashford Club embroidered in gold thread on the chest pocket, and left before the apartment got light. The 4 train at 4:38 a.m. smelled like industrial cleaner, and something underneath it he'd stopped trying to identify years ago. He got a seat because there were only 6 people in the car. He sat by the fontaine and watched Brooklyn drop underground behind him. He didn't put headphones in. Never did, on the commute. The silence before a long day felt like something that needed protecting. He looked at his hands resting on his knees. Long fingers, knuckles slightly enlarged from years of gripping mop handles and delivery bags and the edges of things. A callus on the pad of his right index finger. Another on his left palm. The particular texture of hands that had been doing one kind of work while knowing they were built for something else. He turned them over. Back over again. The train went dark through a tunnel. His reflection appeared in the window, then disappeared, then came back. 29 years old. He looked like a man who had been 35 for a while already. The Ashford Club occupied 4 floors of a limestone building on East 62nd Street, built in 1887, and renovated carefully enough that nothing about it suggested anything had happened since then. Oil paintings in heavy frames. Rugs so thick they swallowed footsteps whole. A bar that opened at 11 and was never, under any circumstances, called a bar. The lounge. Dion had been cleaning it for 3 years. He entered through the soil on the side street, badged in, collected his cart from the supply closet in the basement. His supervisor's Gerald, a man of few spoken words and many laminated, had left a note on the cart. Ballrooms. Tonight. Extra attention to floors and glass surfaces. Dion read it, picked up the mop, started. He worked the reading room first, then the east corridor, then the members' dining room, which smelled of cedar, and last night's steak, and something expensive he had never been able to name, despite 3 years of smelling it every morning. 2 years ago, he had found a billing statement on a side table in the reading room, left open, face up like a grocery receipt, a member's monthly invoice, for $200. He had read it while clearing the table, had tried to do the math on what that number meant relative to his life, and had stopped because the math didn't go anywhere useful. By 6:10 a.m., he reached the ballroom. He stood in the doorway for a moment. The ballroom was large, high-ceilinged, still dark, except for pale gray light coming through the east-facing windows. The particular gray of a city morning before the sun has committed to anything. At the far end of the room, on a low platform that had been rolled into position for tonight's event, sat the Steinway. A Model D concert grand, 9 feet long, ebony finish that took the gray light and gave nothing back. The music stand still held sheet music from whenever someone had used it last. Dion walked in and started on the floor. He worked from the edges inward, the way he always did. He didn't look directly at the piano for the first 20 minutes. He had learned, over time, that looking at it too soon made the morning harder. But at the 30-minute mark, when the floor near the platform was done, and there was nothing left but the area immediately surrounding the instrument, he got close. He set the mop against the cart. He stood beside the piano. The sheet music on the stand was Chopin, Ballade No. 1 in G minor. He recognized it before he read the title, the way you recognize a voice before the face appears. His right hand moved before his brain had time to weigh in. He touched the fallboard, the curved wooden cover over the keys, with his fingertips, lightly. The wood was warm from the overnight heating and smooth in a way that cost money to achieve. He didn't open it. He stood with his hand on the wood and thought about nothing in particular and everything at once. Then footsteps in the corridor. He picked the mop back up and kept working. Earl Dobbs found him at 7:45 a.m. in the supply refilling cleaning solution. Earl was 63 years old, 11 years on security at the Ashford Club. Before that, 15 years playing guitar bass at jazz clubs in Harlem. Before that, a childhood in the Bronx that had shaped his face into something that looked like it had earned every line on it. He leaned against the doorframe. They put the Steinway in the ballroom. I saw a big event tonight. At dinner. Some CEO type, pharmaceutical company, I know. Earl was quiet for a moment. He had the quality of patience that some people carry. Not the patience of waiting, but the patience of already understanding most of what's going to be said and giving it room to arrive at its own speed. You gonna be okay working the room with that piano sitting there? Dion put the solution back on the shelf. I'm fine, Earl. Earl studied him. All right, he said, and walked back to his post. Here is what nobody at the Ashford Club knew about Dion Hayes. In 2017, he was 23 years old and finishing his final year at Howard University on a full academic scholarship, music performance, piano. His professor was a woman named Dr. Elaine Foster, who had studied at a conservatory in New England and had been teaching at Howard for 19 years and did not give praise carelessly. She submitted his senior year, she submitted his name for the Juilliard Graduate Fellowship, full funding. 2 years. The most competitive piano fellowship in the country, the kind of thing that changed the direction of a life. He got in. The letter arrived on a Monday. He read it 3 times, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket, went to dinner with his family that night because his mother had made her good chicken, the one with lemon and thyme, and his father was in a good mood. And his sister was 14 and loud the way 14-year-olds are when everything is still ahead of them. And the evening felt, for one dinner, like the future was something that belonged to him. On Wednesday morning, his father fell. James Hayes was 49 years old and had worked construction for 22 years, skilled, experienced. Carefully winning that men who have done dangerous work for decades become careful. He did not make rookie mistakes. The scaffold was defective. Connections bolts improperly rated for load. Not James's mistake. Not his fault in any way that the word fault is meant to carry. He fell 18 feet. He was alive when the ambulance came. He was not alive by the time Dion reached the hospital. Dion sat in the waiting room for 2 hours before anyone came to find him. He sat very still. He had his father's watch in his hand. They had given it to him with the rest of the personal effects. A gold watch James Hayes worn every working day of his adult life. And Dion held it and looked at the floor and understood, in the specific way you understand things in hospital waiting rooms, that everything was different now. On Friday, he sent the withdrawal letter to Juilliard. He did not consult anyone. He did not discuss it. He wrote the letter and sent it and went back to the apartment in Queens, where his mother had stopped eating and his sister had stopped talking and someone had to keep things moving. So he moved things. He moved things for 7 years. He never told his mother about the fellowship. He never told Simone. With his mother, the reasons was that she already carried enough. With Simone, who was 14 and had just watched her father's funeral, the reason was that some waits aren't for 14-year-olds. And Simone turned 22 and the reason became habit. Habit became silence. Silence became the shape of things. In the small dresser beside his sofa there was a drawer with a cheap brass lock he had installed himself. Inside the drawer, 2 pieces of paper, the acceptance letter from Juilliard and his copy of the withdrawal letter. He had kept because he didn't know what else to do with them. You couldn't throw away the acceptance, even after everything, and the withdrawal was of a choice he had made, and he had needed for a long time to be able to look at it and know that it had been a choice. He had chosen this. It had not been done to him. That distinction had mattered for a while. 3 weeks before the night of the ballroom event, on a Tuesday afternoon, Simone had been looking for a pen. Not in his drawer. She wasn't going through his things. She was looking in the kitchen catch-all bowl, the ceramic one near the refrigerator, where batteries and rubber bands and takeout menus lived. And she hadn't found one, and she had moved to the dresser because there were sometimes pens there. The drawer was locked, but the lock was cheap, and she happened to be holding a hairpin she'd just taken out of her hair. She didn't think about it, she just did it. Because she needed a pen, and the drawer was right there, and it was her brother's stuff, but it was also her home. The drawer opened. No pen. 2 pieces of paper. She read them both. Slowly, Standing in the living room with the dialysis machine humming and her biochemistry textbook on Earl's kitchen table and her brother at his second job somewhere across the borough. She stood there for a long time. Then she put the letters back exactly as she had found them, closed the drawer, left it, found a pen in her jacket pocket, sat back down at the table. She did not say anything to Dion. Not that night, not the next day. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment. She told herself she would know when. But 2 weeks later, in October, when she submitted her application to Columbia's dual degree program, pre-med and music composition, she typed his name into the section, asking for a collaborating performer. Dion Hayes, pianist. She did not ask him first. She told herself she would explain, that there would be a right time for that too. Earl Dobbs had a story he had told in pieces over 11 years of security shifts and late nights, and the occasional shared meal in the break room parceled out slowly enough that Dion had assembled the whole thing only recently. Earl had grown up in the Bronx. Mother worked at a laundromat. Father was not consistently present. At 14, he discovered music through a community program, a young woman running after school sessions in a church basement. She was 20-something. Just starting out, and she taught anyone who showed up. He had taken to the guitar bass with a speed that surprised everyone, including himself. By his mid-20s, he was playing 5 nights a week at good clubs in Harlem, rooms where people listened, where the conversation went quiet when the music got serious. In 1991, a record producer came to one of those rooms, sat through the whole set, came up after with a card and a number and an offer. That same night, Earl went home and found his wife in labor. 6 weeks. He neck-argled the number on the card. He did not frame this as tragedy. He talked about his daughter with the particular warmth of someone who had found out what mattered to them and had chosen it with full knowledge of what they were choosing. He did not perform regret, but every Tuesday and Thursday night when the Ashford Club closed and the last member left and the cleaning crew came on, Earl completed his final walkthrough. He had stopped actually checking the music room 18 months ago. He unlocked it instead. He had started doing this 3 weeks after he caught Dion humming something while mopping the East Corridor at 6 a.m., not humming casually. Humming in the precise way of someone who is containing a much larger sound in a much smaller space. Earl had heard it. Al stopped walking and recognized what he was hearing and had not said anything. The next Tuesday night, the key was on the cart hook. He never explained. Dion never asked. The key appeared. The room was open. In the morning, the key was back on the hook in the supply closet. That was the entire conversation, conducted in objects and absence for 18 months. The piano in the music room was a Steinway upright, a Model K from the 1970s, showing its age in the slightly stiff action of the middle register and a crack in the fallboard veneer that had been badly repaired sometime in the 90s. 3 keys in the upper octave had a faint buzz. The sustain pedal required slightly more pressure than it should. It was not the Model D in the ballroom, but it was a piano, and in the dark of the music room, alone at 11:30 at night, it was more than enough. Dion had been playing in that room for 18 months, not performing, not rehearsing for anything, playing the way you do when the alternative is not playing, which is not a real alternative at all. Bach, Monk, a piece his father had taught him when he was 8 years old, sitting bench in his grandmother's living room. 4 notes that resolved into a chord, simple as a hymn. James Hayes had not been a trained musician, but he had learned those 4 notes from his own father and had passed them down because things get passed down without anyone deciding to pass them. 4 notes. His father had said, everything else comes from 4 notes. Dion played them at the beginning of every session, an anchor. A way of starting from the right place. Then he played Chopin, specifically the Ballade No. 1, the piece he had prepared for his Juilliard audition, the piece he had performed at his senior recital at Howard, where 3 faculty members who never stood for anything had stood, the piece he had not played for 7 years after the withdrawal letter, and then had started again in this room, on this imperfect piano, on a Tuesday night 18 months ago, because he needed to know if it was still there. It was still there. Changed, slower in the places where he had once been fast. More deliberate in passages he had rushed through at 23, because he could rush through them technically, without understanding yet what the rushing cost. 7 years of everything had settled into the music and made it into something it hadn't been when he was young and skilled and still untouched by the specific gravity of things. He played it through the first night back, made it to the end, then sat at the piano without moving for a long time. The piece was still there. He was still there. That was more than he had known how to hope for. 2 weeks before the ballroom event, Dion found a text on his phone from a number he didn't recognize. "Don't come in Friday night." He stared at it. Friday was his regular shift, evening setup crew for a private event. He was on the staff list. Gerald had assigned him. "Who is this?" He mentioned it to Earl the next morning while they were both getting coffee from the break room machine. "Anyone say anything to you about Friday?" Earl reported carefully. "Say anything how?" "I don't know. Just anything." Earl looked at him with the patience of a man who had learned that the right question was worth more than 10 wrong answers. "You getting cold feet about working the room with that piano in it?" "No." "Then I'm not sure what you're asking me." Dion let it go, but he kept the text, and he noted that whoever had sent it had used his personal cell number, not the work number on his HR file, not a number that anyone at the Ashford Club should have had reason to look up. His personal cell, which meant someone had gone looking for it. He told himself it was a wrong number. He mostly believed that. On the Thursday before the Friday event, Dion took the bus with his mother to her dialysis appointment on Atlantic Avenue. Ruth Hayes was 54 years old. She had taught 3rd grade at a public school in Crown Heights for 16 years. Her classroom had been covered in her students' work, drawings and book reports, and small handmade things she had kept organized by year going back to 1998. When she'd had to stop working 18 months ago, the hardest part hadn't been the income. Those losing it had been devastating. The hardest part had been packing the classroom, taking down the drawings, handing the keys back to a principal who was kind but not her friend. She carried herself like a woman mid-sentence, like someone who had been interrupted and was holding the thought carefully until she could finish it. She sat in her regular chair at the center. Pam at the front desk said something warm to her. Ruth said something back and laughed. She was good at that, finding the human thing in a clinical room. Dion sat in the plastic chair beside her while the machine did what her kidneys couldn't. They did not talk about the transplant list. The doctor had said nothing new. Nothing new had its own particular weight, and you didn't pick it up and carry it any more than necessary. Ruth asked about Simone. "She sleeping enough?" No. "Eating?" "Not great. Her biochemistry midterm is next week." "I know. She'll be fine. Not a prediction. A decision." Dion nodded. Then Ruth said, "You look tired, baby. I'm okay." "That's not what I said." He looked at her. She looked back with the patience of a woman who had raised him and had learned, over decades, exactly how long to wait before the thing he was holding would surface on its own. She waited now. "I'm okay, Mom," he said. "Really." She nodded once, slow, accepting it for the moment, not believing it. "Okay," she said, and went back to watching the window. He sat with her for the full 3 hours. On the bus home, she fell asleep against his shoulder. He looked at the back of her head, at the gray that had spread from her temples over the past 2 years. And the math started again without him asking it to do. $290 short every month. The credit card at $160, the interest compounding. He looked out the window. He put his father's watch on a week after the bill and had not taken it off since. Gold, simple. It had been on James Hayes's wrist for 21 years. On the bus, Dion turned his wrist slightly and let it catch the window light. Catherine Voss had built Voss Pharma from a consulting position at a small biotech firm in New Jersey in 2004 to a publicly traded corporation valued at $4. $1 billion by the previous year. This was a fact she never led with. She had grown up in Dayton, Ohio. Father worked at a General Motors plant for 30 years. Mother was an LPN, a licensed practical nurse, working night shifts at a regional hospital for 23 years. Catherine had watched her parents come home tired every single night of her childhood and had understood, with a clarity that most children don't have, that the distance between their life and a different kind of life was made of grades and applications and the willingness to go. She had gone. Ohio State on a partial scholarship, waiting tables to cover the rest. Northwestern for her MBA, then New York. Then the grinding decade of early career that she did not romanticize because she had lived it and knew precisely what it had cost, and was not interested in making it sound like anything other than what it was. She had built something real. She was proud of it. The insulin pricing decision had been made in March of the previous year. She had presented it to the board with full analysis, cost modeling, competitor pricing, R&D investment requirements. The board approved unanimously the price increase, 310 cents. The compassionate access program she launched alongside it reached approximately 0.4% of affected patients. She knew that number. She did not think about it often. There was a version of Catherine Voss who would have thought about it constantly, who had grown up watching her mother leave for night shifts in nursing scrubs and come back 8 hours later with the particular exhaustion of someone who spent the night on keeping other people alive. That version of Catherine existed. She had just gone quiet. The ballroom event was a charity dinner. Specifically, a dinner designed to position Voss Pharma favorably in the healthcare advocacy space before a congressional hearing the following month. Catherine had planned it with precision, the right mix of legislators, donors, press, and industry figures. A keynote she had written and revised 14 times, and at the center of the ballroom, on a low platform, a Steinway Model D that she had specified herself when she called the Ashford Club's events coordinator 3 weeks before. She wanted the piano there, not to be played, as a signal, as a visual shorthand for the kind of evening she was curating. She wore her mother's ring, a simple gold band with a round-cut diamond her father had given her mother in 1976. Her mother had worn it every shift for 23 years, taken it off to scrub in, put it back on after. When she died 2 years ago, quietly, in a room much nicer than the ones she had worked in, because Catherine had made sure of that, the ring came to Catherine. She wore it on her right hand every day. It was the only personal thing she allowed into professional spaces. The evenings was scheduled to begin at 8. It's at 6:10 a.m. That morning, before the guests and the caterers and the event staff had arrived. While the club was still in the gray quiet of early morning, Catherine walked through the ballroom. She had come in early to review the setup personally. She moved through the room with the eye of someone who had run 1,000 such events. The table positioning, the lighting angles, the flowers. Then she stopped. The piano was positioned correctly. Sheet music on the stand, Chopin. She could see the title from several feet away, which meant the print was large enough to be read from a distance, which meant it was functioning more as design element than musical notation. Fine. She was about to move on when she noticed the man. He was at the far edge of the platform. Green uniform, cleaning cart nearby, a mop in his hand that was currently not in motion because he was standing very still with his left hand. No glove on the left hand, she noticed, resting on the closed fallboard of the piano. Not cleaning it, just resting there. She looked at him for a moment. He wasn't looking at the piano. He wasn't looking at anything in particular. He was just present with it, in a way that was different from the quiet of someone daydreaming or spacing out. More like the quiet of someone trying not to let something show. She walked toward him. He heard her coming and pulled his hand back, reached for the mop. Too late. She was 4 feet away. She stopped, looked at him, then at the piano, then at him again. "Are you cleaning it?" she said. "Soft conversational level, the kind of level that has something behind it. Or did you decide to help yourself?" He held the mop steady. "Just finishing the floor around the platform, ma'am. Is that what that was?" He met her eyes and said nothing. Not defiantly, just said nothing. She glanced at the sheet music, then at his hands, both of them now, the one on the mop and the one that had been on the board. Something moved across her face, quick, gone before she decided what to do with it. "Do you play?" she said, and not a real question. He could hear that. The wrong texture for a real question. "I work here," he said, a small smile. "That wasn't what I asked." Across the room, near the far wall, a woman was watching, and she had come in early, too, and for different reasons. She had a meeting at 9 on the Upper West Side, and the Ashford Club was on the way, and she had been wanting to see the ballroom layout before tonight. She was 51 years old, and her name was Dr. Adele Warren, and she had been the director of music programming at Lincoln Center for 9 years. She had grown up in Harlem. She attended events like tonight's with regularity and had developed over 3 decades in her field the habit of watching rooms rather than people, because rooms, she had found, told you more. She watched Catherine Voss and the man in the green uniform standing beside the Steinway. She set down her coffee. She did not look away. Back in Brooklyn, in the apartment with the humming machine and the single working lamp, Simone Hayes was awake at the kitchen table. She was not studying. She had her laptop open to the Columbia application portal. The deadline for the music supplement was 72 hours away. She had submitted her composition 3 days ago. The recording, the one that required a pianist, was listed as pending. Dion's name was in the performer field. She stared at it. She thought about the letters in the drawer, the acceptance, the withdrawal, the silence of silence that lived between them like a wall that had been built so gradually that no one noticed it going up. She thought about closing the laptop. She thought about opening it. She thought, I should tell him. She thought, I will. She thought, tomorrow. Outside, the house passed 2 blocks over. She felt it in the floor, a low vibration she had known her whole life, familiar as way breathing, noticeable only when she was sitting completely still. She was sitting completely still. She closed the laptop, left his name where it was. At the Ashford Club, the morning moved forward. Dion finished the ballroom floor, moved to the next room, moved to the next. The building came alive around him the way it always did, staff arriving up, the smell of the kitchen starting up, the particular sounds of a place transitioning from empty to occupied. He did not go back to the ballroom. He did not look again at the piano. At 12:30 p.m. he clocked out. He had a delivery shift starting at 2. He ate a sandwich on the steps of the side street entrance and watched the foot traffic on 62nd and thought about Friday night and the text from the unknown number and the Steinway in the ballroom and the month's math and his mother's face on the bus and the gold watch on his wrist. He thought about a lot of things. He thought, just get through today. He had been getting through days for 7 years. He was very good at it, but something was different about this Thursday. He could feel it the way you feel weather before it arrives, not in any specific thing, just in the quality of the air. A pressure change, a shift in how the light was falling. Something was coming. He didn't know what. He put his sandwich wrapper in the trash, checked the time, stood, got through the day. The dinner moved the way these things always moved, courses arriving and disappearing, conversations rising and falling. 200 people in a room together, each of them performing a slightly different version of themselves, the version that fit this room, these clothes, this particular Thursday evening in October. Dion moved through it the way he always did, invisible. Not metaphorically, practically. There was a technique to it he had developed over 3 years of working events at the Ashford Club, refined over the 7 years before that of being a young black man learning which rooms required you to become part of the furniture. You moved at not so fast you drew attention, not so slow you became an obstacle. You made eye contact with no one. You anticipated where you needed to be before you needed to be there. You let the room forget you were in it. He refilled water glasses, cleared plates, repositioned a floral arrangement knocked slightly sideways by someone's elbow. He moved through the gaps between conversations the way water moves through cracks, finding the path of least resistance, going where it was needed, leaving no mark. The Steinway sat at the far end of the room on its platform. He did not look at it directly, not yet. He had learned over 18 months of Tuesday and Thursday nights that looking at the piano too soon made everything harder. You had to earn your way up to it. You had to let the evening get settled first. He kept moving. The first course was cleared by 8:45. Catherine Voss was near the center of the room, holding a champagne flute and speaking with a man in a charcoal suit who had the particular posture of someone who had learned to take up space as a professional requirement. A senator, probably. Dion had gotten good at reading the posture of powerful men. Senators stood like they were always addressing someone just behind you. Catherine was listening, nodding at the right moments, smiling when the smile was called for, but her eyes moved. Dion noticed because noticing things in rooms was part of the job and had become, over years, simply part of how he processed spaces, the exits, the obstacle points, the people who were about to need something. Her eyes moved to the Steinway, then to him, then back to the senator. He kept moving. By 9:15, the dinner plates were cleared, and the room had loosened into its post-dinner configuration. People drifted. Noise rose as the champagne continued its quiet work. Dion was near the service entrance, stacking the last of the dessert plates onto a tray, when Catherine moved to the small stage near the front of the room. He half listened. He was good at half listening to speeches at events like this. Not from cynicism, exactly, more from the self-protective instinct of a man who had spent years working in rooms where the speeches and the reality occupied completely separate territories, and exhausting yourself trying to locate the door between them helped no one. Healthcare is not a privilege, Catherine was saying. It is a responsibility. And Vasafarma has never, he tuned it out. He thought about $100, thought about appointment on Thursday, which was yesterday, which meant today was already Friday. He thought about the doctor's careful language. The list is active. We're monitoring. The science is very promising. The word promisings. What promising cost to say and what it cost to hear. He stacked the last plate, lifted the tray, turned toward the kitchen. He was coming back through the service entrance at 9:41 when the room shifted. He felt it before he understood it. A temperature change, a drop in noise level that was not silence but was different from what had been there a moment before. He looked up from the tray. Catherine Voss was standing beside the Steinway, not at the microphone, not at a table. Beside the piano on its platform, facing the room with a champagne flute in one hand and the other resting on the closed fallboard, his fallboard. He had touched that wood at 6:10 this morning. "I want to share something with you all," she said. Her voice carried without effort. The ballroom was built voices like hers. Confident voices, voices that assumed they would be heard. Tonight is about healthcare, about access, about the people who are underserved by a system that was not designed with them in mind. Murmurs, his glasses raised. But I want to take a moment to talk about something else. About what it means to be in a room like this one. About what it means to belong somewhere. Dion set the empty tray on a side table. He should have kept moving. He knew that. The kitchen was 20 feet behind him, and there were still 2 tables to clear, and Gerald would notice. But there was a direction to Catherine's voice, a vector, the kind that exists before the destination is named. He stayed still. "Had a small incident earlier today," she said, and the smile was there now, the same one he seen at 6 a.m., small and controlled, aimed. One of our service staff was found at this instrument. The room oriented toward her 200 heads, not cleaning it in. A pause, deliberate, time, touching it. Something moved through Dean's chest, not panic. Something quieter and colder than panic. The recognition of a situation that has already been set. "Now I want to be fair." She let the word settle. "I am always fair." So, rather than makes assumptions, she turned. Found him across the room with the precision of someone who had known exactly where he was standing since he walked back through the service entrance. "I'd like to ask him directly." 200 pairs of eyes followed hers. Found him. Dion did not move. He stood with his hand on the side table, and the empty tray on the surface beside him, and 200 people looking at him, and he took one slow breath through his nose and released it. "Would you join us up here, please?" Not a question. The grammatical shape of one, not the substance. He walked toward the platform, 25 feet, maybe 30. Every step is landing in a silence that had expanded to accommodate the moment. He kept his shoulders level, his face neutral. He had been practicing neutral for a long time. He was very good at it. He stopped 6 feet from the platform. Catherine looked at him with the pleasant, attentive expression of a woman who had already decided what was going to happen and was now enjoying the opening movements. "Do you play?" she asked. Same words as this morning, same texture, same questions that was not actually a question, except now there were 200 people watching the answer. "I work here," he said, laughter, scattered, light. The kind of laughter that doesn't know what it's laughing at yet but has chosen a side. "Yes." Catherine's smile adjusted slightly.
Just slightly. We can all see that, but I'm asking something different.
She glanced at the piano, then back at him. "This instrument requires a great deal of training, a great deal of preparation." The pause was calculated, the word preparation landing in the space where a more explicit word had been implied and then declined. "To play at its level." Silence. "So I'm curious." She tilted her head. "Do you play?" He looked at her steadily. She looked back, and the room held itself with the particular sensation of a crowd that is identified to entertainment and is waiting for it to begin. "Because here is what I'll do." Her voice warmed, the generous offer. "If you can play that piano, truly play it, not just press keys, I will marry you right here, tonighter." Louder now. Someone in the back said something appreciative. Someone also made a sound that meant they couldn't look away. Catherine reached inside pocket of her blazer. She brought out the ring, her mother's ring, the gold band with the round-cut diamond that Margaret Voss had worn on night shifts for 23 years. Catherine held it up briefly, long enough for the chandelier light to find it, long enough for the room to see what she was holding. Then she set it on the music stand above the Chopin. "There is your proposal," she said. More laughter, bigger. And near the far wall, at a table she had claimed early in the evenings because it gave her a line to the entire room, a woman stopped in the act of raising her water glass. Dr. Adele Warren set the glass back down without drinking from it. She had been watching the room all evening, the way she always watched rooms at events like this, tracking the social currents, the power arrangements, the small negotiations that happened in the margins of official programming. She had noticed Dion the moment he walked back through the service entrance at 9:41. Had noticed the way Catherine's attention shifted, had understood, a few seconds before Catherine turned to the microphone, what was about to happen. Now she watched the man in the green uniform standing 6 feet from the platform with his hands at his sides. She had grown up in Harlem. She had spent 30 years working in rooms full of musicians, conservatory graduates, working professionals, people who had made careers and people who hadn't, and people who occupied the complicated middle territory between those outcomes where most real lives actually live. She knew what skill looked like in a person's body before they played a note. She knew the posture, the quality of stillness. She looked at Dion's hands, the length of the fingers, the way they were not quite relaxed at his sides, not tense, but aware. The hands of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of and was, at this particular moment, deciding whether to let anyone else know. She put her water glass down. She crossed her arms. She watched. The room was fully oriented toward Dion. No, phones appeared. Not all at once, the ripple of curved screens lifting that started at the edges and moved inward. Whatever happened in the next few minutes was going to be recorded and sent somewhere, and that was a fact that existed independent of anyone's preferences. Catherine was speaking again. Something about the nature of spaces and the people who belonged in them. She had a gift for the implication that avoided the explicit for saying the thing without quite saying it, which was more effective and more deniable. And underneath all of it, underneath the noise of the crowd and the particular discomfort of 200 people watching a situation they had agreed to find funny, Dion heard something else. Not a sound, more like the feeling a sound leaves, his odd father's voice, not a specific memory, just the quality of it, the steadiness. James Hay had been a steadman, not because life had been easy for him, because he had decided at some point that steadiness was the thing he had to offer, and he had offered it consistently. He thought about the watch on his wrist. He thought about 4 notes. Simple. From a Thursday afternoon when he was 8 years old on a bench in his grandmother's living room, his father showing him 4 notes on a piano that nobody in the family played except as something to dust and display. Everything else comes from 4 notes. Dion looked at the Steinway. He looked at the ring on the music stand. He looked at Catherine Voss and her composed face, and the 200 people arranged in a semicircle of expectation. He looked at the service door. Earl was there. He had come in from the corridor sometime in the past few minutes, quietly, the way Earl did everything, and was standing just inside the door with his arms at his sides and his face very still. He nodded. Once. Small. The entire communication. Dion reached into his right pocket and took out his work gloves. Both of them. He set them on the side table beside the empty tray. He walked to the piano. He sat on the bench, adjusted its height, one smooth movement, automatic from years of muscle memory, calibrating exactly where he needed to be. He settled his feet on the pedals, placed his hands above the keys without touching them yet. He looked at the sheet music on the stand. Chopin Bade No. 1 in G minor. He put it aside. He did not need it. The room had been waiting for fumbling. It had calibrated itself for the specific comedy of a man attempting something beyond him, for the moment where the joke landed. But the way Dion moved the sheet music, not nervously, not dramatically, just efficiently, the way you move something that is not relevant to what you are about to do, introduced the first small note of uncertainty into the room's expectations. A few people near the front exchanged a glance. He placed his hands above the keys, and he did not play the Chopin, not yet, not first. 4 note, that was all. Slow, simple. A figure in G minor that had nothing to do with Frédéric Chopin and everything to do with a Thursday afternoon, and a bench that was too tall for an 8-year-old, and a man named James Hayes who had worked construction for 22 years and had died on a Wednesday and had left behind a gold watch and 4 promise that his son had been keeping ever since. The room didn't know what to do with 4 notes. It had prepared itself for fumbling or for silence, for the punchline. 4 quiet, clean, deliberate notes were neither of those things. They were something else, something that required a moment to classify. The laughter at the edges of the room thinned. Dion held the last note for 1 beat. Then he moved into the ballade. Not the way you attack a piece. The way you step into a river when you know the water. When you've been in this river before and you know where the current runs and where it slows and what it does at the bends. The opening was quiet. The ballad always began quietly, a question, a door opening slowly into a room you couldn't see yet, single notes in the left hand establishing the ground, a melody above it, clean and careful, placed with the kind of precision that only looks effortless when it has been earned throughout thousands of hours of not being effortless at all. The room kept waiting for the mistake. 3 measures, 5, 8, no mistake. The woman near the front with the champagne glass stopped raising it, just held it there, suspended, forgotten. The senator in the charcoal suit turned slowly toward the piano without appearing to decide to. Someone's phone dipped. The hand holding it had received instructions from somewhere deeper than the conscious mind and had partially complied. Catherine Voss had not moved. She stood beside the platform with her hand no longer on the fallboard and her champagne flute at her side and her face doing something she was not supervising carefully enough. The smile was still there, but it had lost its direction. It was pointing somewhere, and the somewhere had shifted. The piece opened outward. There was no other way to describe it. It opened the way a room opens when someone turns on the lights after a long time in the dark, not suddenly, not with drama, but completely. The harmonies deepened. The left hand took on its full weight. The melody began to breathe the way it breathed when someone understood what it was saying rather than simply knowing how to produce it. Dion's shoulders had dropped. He hadn't noticed when. His wrists were moving above the keys with the fluid ease of someone who has done this so many times that the body knows what the mind is going to ask before the mind has finished asking it. 7 years away from any stage had changed nothing about the technical foundation. If anything, it had clarified something, burned away whatever had been extra, whatever had been from performance rather than truth, and left something that was just the music and the man playing it. The woman behind the senator started crying. She did not know she had started. It happened in the space between one breath and the next, below the level of decision. Her hand went to her face, and she found her own cheek wet, and for a moment she did not know what to do with that information. A man near the bar set his glass down on the high table beside him, with the care of someone setting something fragile somewhere safe, and then crossed his arms and looked at the piano and did not look away again. Dr. Warren had moved, not dramatically, not quickly. She had crossed perhaps 15 feet of ballroom without being conscious of crossing them, and was now seating closer to the platform than she had been. Her arms crossed, her chin slightly up, her face wearing the expression she wore when she was in the presence of something she needed to think about carefully. She had been doing this for 30 years. She had sat in rooms with pianists who had Juilliard degrees and recording contracts and management and 3 years of concert experience. She knew what trained playing sounded like. She knew what gifted playing sounded like. She knew the difference between a musician executing a learned piece and some musician saying something through a piece that could only be said this way, in this museum, by this specific accumulation of life pressing through these specific hands. She was hearing the second thing. She stood still and listened and made rapid, serious decisions the way she had learned to make them, without sentimentality, without the distortion of wanting something to be true, based purely on what was in front of her. What was in front of her was extraordinary. Catherine Voss had taken 2 steps backward, not retreating, just adjusting, taking distance to get the full shape of something she had not expected to need to look at this way. She was watching Dion with the expression of someone who has made a calculation based on available information and has just been presented with information that was not available. Underneath the calculation, underneath 15 years of professional self-management and the controlled expression she wore in public like a second skin. A kitchen in Dayton, a Sunday morning. Her mother at the counter in her nursing scrubs, just home from a night shift, standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of tea she was too tired to drink, and a radio on the counter playing something classical and low, and her mother humming along. Not intentionally, not performing anything. Just humming because the music was there and she was there, and for a moment nothing else was required of her. Catherine had not thought about the kitchen in a very long time. The memory arrived now without asking permission. Her right hand closed, reached for the ring that was on the music stand and not on her finger. Closed around nothing. At the service door, something was happening that Dion could not see. A man in a dark suit had positioned himself near the back corner of the room approximately 20 minutes into Dion's performance. He had been at the event earlier. Dion had noticed him during the cocktail hour. The kind of man who attended events without appearing on guest lists, who spoke to the right people quietly and did not introduce himself to anyone else. He had the look of someone who operated in the margins of other people's events with specific purpose. He was speaking now to one of the venue's security staff. Very quietly, his hand moved in a short gesture toward the piano, toward Dion. His expression was not the expression of a man who was moved by what he was hearing. The security guard nodded, began to move. Earl saw it. Earl had been standing inside the service door for the past 20 minutes. He had watched the security guard receive instruction and start moving, and he had stepped out from the doorframe into the edge of the room, not dramatically, not at speed, and positioned himself between the guard and the piano, just there. A large, calm, 63-year-old man standing in the way of where someone was trying to go. The guard stopped, looked at Earl. Earl looked back. He had the stillness of a man who had learned, over 15 years of playing in Harlem clubs, that stillness could be louder than noise when applied at the right moment. The rooms where things could get tense, the nights when someone needed to be the fixed point. He was the fixed point. The guard looked at the man in the dark suit. The man in the dark suit looked at Earl. Something passed between them that did not become words. The guard stepped back. Earl did not move. The music continued. The development section arrived. If the opening of the ballades were a question, the development was the process of answering it, fully, completely, without softening anything for the sake of comfort. Dion's hands separated into independent voices. The left hand driving forward in bass octaves that resonated in the marble floors, traveled up through the legs of chairs and into the bodies of the people sitting in them. The right hand climbing above, the two lines moving against each other with the earned tension of something that has been building since the first measure. Somewhere in the room, a glass was set down on a hard surface, and the sound of it was startling because the room had gone so quiet that the glass seemed to know it needed to be careful. The senator sat down, not in a chair he had been sitting in a chair that happened to be behind him. He sat down without looking for it because his legs had reached an independent conclusion. Dr. Warren uncrossed her arms, both hands at her sides now. The posture of someone who has stopped doing anything else and is just listening with everything they have. Catherine was absolutely still. She was looking at Dion with an expression that no longer had the name she had come in with. Something was happening in her face that her face was not accustomed to and did not have a prepared configuration for. Not embarrassment, not yet. Something prior to embarrassment. The thing that happens when the story you are telling about a situation is contradicted by the situation itself, and the two things exist simultaneously for a moment before one of them wins. She was looking at his hands. She was looking at the hands she had looked at this morning, the calloused, overworked hands of a man who cleaned floors for a living. And she was watching those hands do something that she had been told, by every system she had built herself within, those hands could not do. And underneath watching the kitchen again, the radio. Her mother humming without knowing she was humming, the cadenza section. This was the part of the ballade that separated. Not professional from amateur, that separation had already happened long before this point in the piece. This section separated players from musicians. It could be executed technically. You could hit every note. You could come out the other side with your hands intact. But the cadenza was Chopin asking a different kind of question. Not can you play this. Can you play this is answered in the first 8 measures, or it isn't answered at all. The cadenza Ask something else. What do you have to say? Dion had been 23 the last time he played this publicly. He had played it correctly, with the considerable technique of a young man who had worked hard for a long time. His professors had stood. He had been proud. He was 29 now. He had worked 3 jobs and slept on a fold-out sofa and watched his mother's kidneys fail 1 session at a time and made the same calculation every month for 4 years and buried his father with money they borrowed and paid back over 18 months and surrendered something he could not name without it, costing something he could not afford to spend. He was 29 now, and the cadenza sounded exactly like that. The right hand moved up into cascading runs that crossed back over themselves, chromatic lines that resolving into harmonics that rang against the ceiling, and Camas back changed. The left hand anchored in bass octaves, so deep they seemed to come from below the floor, from somewhere underneath the building, from whatever's was under all of this. The man near the bar had put his hands over his mouth. The woman who had been crying was crying without trying to stop, and had stopped caring about trying. The senator's wife, sitting beside him now, she had moved to the chair next to him at some point during the development section, had her hands on his arm and was gripping it with a presence that was not about him. Dr. Warren had moved again. She was 12 feet from the platform. She had stopped tracking when she moved. She was listening with her entire body in the way she listened to the musicians she considered significant. The ones where the listening was not a professional activity,
but something close
to what listening originally was, before you learned to do it with any distance at all. She was making decisions rapidly. She was a woman who made rapid decisions in her field and was rarely wrong, and she was making one now that would require follow-up in the morning. The cadenza resolved. The final section returned to the ballade's opening theme, but transformed. Not the question it had been. Something that had traveled through everything the piece contained and had come back different. Stating rather than asking, claiming rather than wondering. Dion played the final measures the way you close a door you have needed to close for a long time. With full attention, with the understanding of what is on both Zolta's side of it. The final chord. He pressed the sustain pedal to the floor and let the harmonics live in the room for as long as they wanted to live. 3 seconds, 5, 6. The last of the sound dissolved. And then silence. Complete silence. The silence of 200 people who are breathing very carefully because they have just been in the presence of something and they do not want to disturb the air it left behind. Dr. Adele Warren stood up. She was already standing, had been standing. But she stood up in the sense that she oriented her full height toward the platform and brought her hands together, and the sound of her clapping ceased. The silence was a statement before it was an invitation. She was alone for 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time when it is the 4 seconds before a room decides what it is. Then the woman who had been crying stood.
Say the solicitor.
Then his wife, who had already been gripping his arm and now released it because she needed both hands. Then the ripple, the irreversible ripple that moves through a crowd when it has stopped deliberating and simply acts. The room stood, not from politeness. Politeness is a decision. This was not a decision. This was a room that had stopped being able to remain seated. Catherine Voss stood. She rose slowly, like someone getting up from a longer time on the ground than they had realized. Like someone whose body had received information that required a moment to process before it could produce was upright. She was looking at the man on the bench. He was sitting with his head slightly bowed and his hands in his lap, and his chest rising and falling with the quiet who has just given something large. He was not performing stillness. He was still. She had built this evening. She had planned every element of it. She had specified the piano, written the keynote 14 times, arranged the room, curated the guest list. She had controlled the conditions for everything that happened in this room tonight. She was not controlling this. She had not planned this. And standing in the applause she had not anticipated. Beside the piano she had placed here as a prop, and which had just become something else entirely, Catherine Voss had the specific experience of a person who has been proven wrong in public about something they were certain of. It was not a comfortable experience. It was, she would think later, much later, in a quiet apartment on the Upper East Side with no one else present, a necessary one. Dion stood from the bench, slowly, the way you stand when you've been somewhere far and have come back. He turned to face the room. 100 people, the phones, the faces that had arranged themselves over the past 20 minutes into something very different from what they had been. He looked at them and felt the strange vertigo of a man who has been one thing for a long time and has just in public and without planning to become something else. He looked at Catherine Voss. She was 4 feet away. She had moved toward the platform during the final section without noticing herself moving. Close enough now that he could see the slight unsteadiness in her expression. The thing she was doing with her right hand, closing it, opening it, reaching for something that was not there. He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't need that ring," he said. His voice carried, not because he projected it, because the room had gone quiet for it. "I don't need anything from you." He said it without anger, without performance. Anger would have been easier for her, easier to deflect, easier to translate into something manageable, easier to make the story about. He said it the way you say something that is simply true. "But I need you to remember my name. Dion Hayes." One breath. "And the next time you look at someone and think you already know what they are, ask first. Just ask." The room held the words. Catherine's face moved through something complicated and real. The composure was still there. She was still holding the composure. But it was holding against pressure it had not been designed to hold against. She looked at the music stand, at her mother's ring sitting on top of the Chopin she had placed there as a prop for someone else's humiliation. She reached out and picked it up, held it in her palm. The room watched her. She stood there long enough that the silence became its own presence in the room. Then she looked at Dion. "This ring was my mother's," she said. Her voice was level, stripped of its earlier warmth. This was a different kind of level, the kind that comes from having to work to say something true in a room full of people who came to watch something. She was a nurse, night shifts, 23 years. She stopped, started again. She would not recognize me tonight. She held the ring out. He looked at it, then at her, he took it. She turned and walked away from the platform. Not quickly, not with any of the drama the room might have expected. She just walked, through the crowd that parted for her, the way crowds had always parted for her, through the space that money and authority create automatically. And something had cracked in her that was not visible from the outside, but was present in every step. Not broken, not collapsed, cracked, the way old wood cracks before it opens, the way something has to give before it can change. The room let her go, then turned back toward Dion. The applause resumed, is larger than before, with the specific intensity of a crowd that is applauding not just what it witnessed, but what it now understands about what it almost did not witness, what it had been prepared to do instead. Dr. Warren was already moving toward the platform, and somewhere in the building, in the corridor, outside the service entrance, Earl Dobbs leaned against the wall and listened to 200 people clap and said nothing to no one and allowed himself privately to feel exactly what he felt, which was, yes, that. The video had 18 million views by 6 a.m. Dion found out from Simone, who called 3 times before he picked up. He was on the 4 train heading into Manhattan for his morning shift. He kept the commute silent on principle. The quiet before a long day felt like something worth protecting. He picked up on the 3rd call. "You're everywhere," she said. "Good morning. 1.8 million views. Since last, still going." He looked at his reflection in the dark train window. "Okay," he said. "Okay, that's it? What do you want me to say? Are you seriously going into work right now?" "I have a shift, Simone." Silence. Silent, the kind that has a lot behind it. "We need to talk today," she said. "Not tomorrow." "I know. You don't know what about." He watched Brooklyn go underground. "I have some ideas," he said, and hung up. Earl was at the service entrance. Dion arrived, not on shift, in his regular clothes, with 2 coffees from the diner on 61st. He handed one over without a word. They stood on the side street in the October cold. A delivery truck idled across from them. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "How many?" Earl said. 1.8 million. "Still climbing." Earl nodded slowly. "You scared?" he said. Don considered the honest answer. He owed Earl honest answers. "A little," he said. "Yeah, good. Scared means you understand the size of it." Earl finished his coffee, crushed the cup. The wrong move is deciding too fast because the moment is loud. Loud moments make bad decisions. Let it get quiet first. Dion nodded. "Go do your shift," Earl said. "The world will still be there when you're done." He mopped the east corridor. Same carts, same green uniform, same building. The ballroom was dark and empty. When he passed, the stubway pushed against the wall. Luntritz felt like her. The platform folded and leaning. The room already just a room again. He stopped in the doorway for a moment, looked at the covered piano, kept moving. What Gerald found at 8:20 in the supply closet, holding a handwritten note and wearing an expression Dion had never seen on him before. Something he didn't have a laminated sound soon for. "Message for you," Gerald said. When called the front desk, Dion took the paper. "Mr. Hayes, Dr. Adele Warren, Lincoln Center. Please call at your earliest convenience. Not urgent," but he folded it, put it in his pocket next to the ring that was still there from last night. Gerald lingered. "I was near the kitchen pass-through," he said. "Last night. I heard it." He looked at his clipboard, then back at Dion. 11 years I've worked events here. I haven't heard anything like that." He walked away before Dion could respond. Dion called Simone at lunch from the concrete bench in the courtyard. Cold enough to need his jacket, she picked up immediately. I need to tell you something," she said. "I know, you don't know. Columbia, your music supplement. You put my name on it without asking me." Silence. Long enough to confirm it. "How did you know?" she said. "You called at 6 in the morning and said we needed to talk today. You don't do that for good news." She exhaled. "I found the letters in the drawer. 3 weeks ago. I was looking for a pen and the lock was..." She stopped. "I found them. The jewel-jarred acceptance and the withdrawal, both of them." He was very still on the bench. "I should have told you," she said. "I kept waiting for the right time. And then I put your name on the application. Because I thought, if you just had a reason, something external that made you have to play again. That's not your decision. I know. Simone, that is not your decision to make. I know that. Quieter now, without defensiveness. But you withdrew from Juilliard without talking to anyone. That affected all of us. That affected what Mom got to hear, what I got to see." She paused. "I'm not saying I was right. I'm saying we've both been making decisions alone about things that don't only belong to us." He said nothing. She let the silence exist. "How much time is left on the deadline?" he said. She breathed. 44 hours, midnight Sunday. He looked at the courtyard wall. Old brick, dark with decades of weather. "I'm not saying yes right now. I know. I need to think." "Okay. And send Simone. Don't do that again without asking." "I know." A pause. He thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet," he said. "Ask me in a few days." He was angry. He took the long way home, walking instead of the train. 40 minutes and sorted it while he walked. Angry that she'd decided for him. Angry that her decision had led to last night, to 1.8 million views, to a handwritten note in his pocket from Lincoln Center. Angry that both of those things were true at the same time. Angry most of all at the 7 years of the locked drawer. At the version of keeping going that had required making himself smaller until invisible felt the same safe. He stopped outside their building, looked up at the window. The bent lamp was on inside. He went up. Ruth was in her armchair by the window, book closed in her lap. She had been watching her baby. "Hey, Mom." He sat on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees, looked at the floor for a moment. She waited. She had always known how long to wait. 30 seconds, maybe. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I should have told you a long time ago," she said. "Okay." He told her about Juilliard, all of it. The letter Monday, his father's fall Wednesday, the withdrawal Friday, the locked drawer. 7 years of keeping the shape of it from her so that she wouldn't grieve it, and so that the choice would stay a choice rather than become a wound. He watched her face while he talked. She didn't react the way he'd spent 7 years imagining. No hurt, no guilt. She listened the way she listened to things she already knew the shape of. When he finished, she said, "I know." He looked at her. "I found the withdrawal letter," she said, "in your jacket pocket, the gray one from the funeral. I was washing it 2 weeks after. It was in the inside pocket." He sat with that. 7 years, he said, "Yes? You never said anything. Because you needed to believe you'd chosen it freely. Every time I thought about bringing it up, I could see that the choice was what was holding you together. The fact that it had been yours." She paused. "And it was yours. I'm not taking that from you. But I didn't want you carrying the guilt of it on top of everything else." The dialysis machine hummed in the corner. The lamp cast its light to one side. "We should have talked," he said. "Yes, we should have been talking about this for 7 years. That's true." She leaned forward slightly. "But here we are now. So tell me something. What do you actually want? Not what makes sense. What do you want?" He hadn't been asked that question in a long time. I want to play, he said. The words came out without the usual architecture around them. Clean. I want to play somewhere that matters, and he stopped. I want what I gave up to have been worth it. I need it to have meant something. Ruth nodded. Slow. Then make it worth it, she said. That's still yours to do. That door is still open. He looked at the drawer. He got the key from the closet hook, unlocked it, took out both letters, stood holding them for a moment, the paper soft at the folds from 7 years of being handled. He set them on the kitchen counter. Canterbury, open, face up, left them there. He called Dr. Warren Saturday morning, told her yes on Wednesday. She was quiet a moment, then, good, paperwork by end of week. Tell me. I want someone acknowledged in the program materials. Earl Dobbs, he's the security guard at the Ashford Club. He gave me access to a piano here twice a week for 18 months. Without him, none of this happens. He paused. He should be named as a teacher because that's what he was. A long silence. Earl Dobbs, she said. Yes. Another pause. I know Earl Dobbs, she said quietly. Something in her voice opened up. I've been trying to find him for 15 years. Dion said nothing, let her have it. He was in a program I ran in Harlem in 1993, she said. One of the most gifted students I ever taught. I lost track of him. I looked twice and couldn't find him. She paused. 11 years, Dion said. Silence. Can I tell him myself? She said. What he still means. I think you should. She came on Thursday. Asked for Earl at the front desk. Dion was there but off to one side, the way Earl had been at the service door on Friday night. Present without being the point. He watched them look at each other across 32 years. She said, I looked for you, he said. I heard you had. A pause. I wasn't sure I was ready to be found, she said. And now? Earl considered. 4 seconds. Same as always. Now seems all right, he said. She told him about the program expansion. 3 neighborhoods. What she needed and why she thought he was right for it. Direct. No decorations. When she finished, Earl said, I haven't played in 15 years. I know. I'm 63. I know how old you are. I looked at her. She looked back. All right, he said. 40 minutes for the Columbia deadline. Dion and Simone stood in the music room at the Ashford Club. They hadn't talked much on the walkover. Saturday's phone call had opened something that would take more than one conversation to walk through. But they were here. That was enough for now. Earl had left the key on the cart hook, as always. This time, there was something beside it. A small portable recorder, old cassette tape. A note in underneath on torn paper. Used this at a session in 1989. Still works. Simone played a recording of herself humming the melody over a rough piano track. Her original composition for the Columbia supplement. Dion listened with his eyes closed. Again, he said. She played it again. He listened to the spaces between the notes. She had decided to be silent, what the silences were asking for. Okay, he said. He sat at the piano and played her piece, not from the score, from the listening. He made choices as he went that weren't in what she had hummed. A voicing here. More room before the final phrase. Simone stood near the door. She had lived in his piece for 6 weeks, had played it 100 times in her head, until not heard it until right now, until someone else played it back to her, and she could finally hear what it actually was, separate from the work of making it. Her hand went to her mouth. Dion played it through. Then again, differently. He stopped. Which one? He said. She cleared her throat. Second, he played it a third time, clean and whole, held the final chord. Let it go. Earl pressed stop on the old recorder. He had come in quietly during the first playthrough, and neither of them had acknowledged it because there was no need. The file transfer took 6 minutes. Simone uploaded and submitted with 11 minutes to spare. She sat back from the laptop, looked at the screen. Thank you, she said. He looked at his sister, the sweatshirt, shirt, the pen notes on her palm. The piece she had written that was better than she knew. Don't do that again, he said, without asking. I know. Okay. He stood from the bench. You're welcome. She laughed, fractured slightly because her eyes were wet, but real. Earl from the door, without looking up. It's past midnight. Go home. Carnegie Hall. First week of April. 5 months and 3 weeks after the night at the Ashford Club. The residency had moved faster than expected. Dr. Warren had said so once, briefly in an email. Dion had read it and gone to his next rehearsal. The debut was a smaller stage, 400 seats. Still Carnegie Hall, in every way the words meant anything. Sold out in 9 days. He stood in the wing, black tuxedo, simples his father's watch on his left wrist. He could hear the house settling, the murmur going quiet. A room of people all moving from outside to inside from wherever they'd come from into this. He breathed. He thought about a 414 alarm, a locked drawer, a green uniform and a cart in a supply closet, send 7 years of corridors where no one looked at him. He thought about 4 notes. He walked out. Front row, Ruth. The blue dress from his Howard graduation taken in at the sides by some Simones, and she was looking at him with the smile he had needed to see again. The one from before everything got heavy. The Sunday morning smile, the one that didn't cost anything, beside her. Some Simone. Columbia sweatshirt. He had told her to wear something nicer. She had ignored him completely. 1 row back. Earl, dark blue suit Dion had never seen before. Hands folded in his lap. Face, the stillness someone who has arrived somewhere they weren't sure they'd arrive and is taking it in carefully. He looked at Dion. He nodded. Once. Small. The same nod from the service door in October. Dion looked further out, row 14. He had left a ticket at the box office under C. Voss. Had not told anyone. Did not know if she would come. She was there. Alone. Sitting in the posture of someone who had come to listen, not to be seen listening. No performance in her presence. Just a woman in a seat in a room where music was about to happen. She looked like the daughter of a woman who used to hum along with the radio. Their eyes met. He nodded. She returned it. He sat at the Steinway. He opened with Chopin. Ballade number 1. He had played it at Howard, had prepared it for Juilliard, had played it in the dark of the music room for 18 months, had played it for 200 people who expected him to fail. Tonight he played it without anything attached to it. No challenge. No weight of the locked drawer pressing up through the notes. Just the music and what 7 years had made of him, slower in the places he once raced, more willing to sit inside a silence, more sure of what the silences were for. He played it through completely. The house was still. Final chord. He held the sustain pedal to the floor and let the harmonics exist for as long as they wanted. Then he let it go. And then, not in the program, not planned, he played the 4 notes. His father's 4 notes. Simple, old, jazz. American a Thursday afternoon, a bench too tall for an 8-year-old. Fort Old, 4 notes in Charnagoo Hall on Ice Band Tuesday in April. He let them ring, let them dissolve. The applause came up like weather. He stood, did not bow immediately, looked at the front row. Ruth smiling, not crying, smiling. Earl with his hands still folded in his lap, face doing something complicated and real that did not need applause to express itself. Dion looked at him for a moment. Earl looked back. A key on a cart hook. A door opened twice for 18 months. The music moving between them through the wood. He bowed. He played the rest of the program. Played it well, better than well, with the specific authority of someone who has confirmed, at 29, that the thing they believed about themselves was true, and had in fact grown truer with everything that had tried to make it otherwise. Afterward, in the small reception room, there were people and warmth and the pleasant noise of a crowd that had decided to be happy about what it witnessed. Simone had held the composure through the entire performance and let it go in the corridor outside, and was now in the room with her eyes slightly red and her chin up. Ruth waited until things thinned. She held his hands in both of hers and looked at him without speaking for a moment, putting it somewhere permanent. Then she said, "Your father would have known exactly what to say." Dion nodded. "I don't," she said, "so I'm just going to say I am very proud of you every day, including the days when you were on that sofa and I couldn't say it because it would have made everything harder." She squeezed his hands, "But I'm saying it now." He held onto her hands. Earl found him at the edge of the room when the crowd had thinned. They stood side by side, the way they'd stood on the side street in October with their coffees. "You know what I kept thinking about out there?" Earl said. "Tell me." 1991. That producer. What would have happened if I'd called? He was quiet a moment. Then I thought if I had, I wouldn't have been at that community center in 93. Warren wouldn't have found me. I wouldn't have ended up at the Ashford Club. Wouldn't have been in that corridor the morning I heard you hum. He looked at Dion. It's not saying seeing it all have to do for a reason. I don't believe in that. He shook his head slightly. But some things lead to other things. And you don't know which moments matter until you're standing somewhere like this, looking back at the line. Dion looked at his father's watch. "Earl," he said. "Yeah, thank you for opening the door." Earl looked at him, then out at the room. Thank you for walking through it, he said. Outside, the city was doing what it always did. Dean stood on the sidewalk, cold, clear, the kind of night that insists on the present tense. He put his hands in his coat pockets. The ring was still there. He had been carrying it since October, moving it jacket to jacket. He would figure out what to do with it. He looked up at the building, lights still on inside. He was 29 years old. He had a residency and the beginning of something that didn't have a full shape yet. A mother whose health was moving in the right direction. A sister in a Columbia sweatshirt who was learning alongside him that some decisions had to be made together. A man named Earl Dobbs who had opened a door twice a week for 18 months and was now opening different doors for other people. A long way still to go. He knew that. He also knew, with the solidity of something that had stopped being hope and become fact, that the way was open. He walked toward the subway. The alarm was set for 6:30 now. Had been for 2 weeks. The first concrete sign he'd allowed himself that something was different. 6. The doors open. The music waiting.